This is my audience. Good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Molina, and today I'll be giving you an informative speech on the barriers of good listening. Okay, so I'd like to start out by asking a question. Why is it important to know your barriers? Now ask yourself, what kind of barriers are happening right now as I listen to the speaker? Most people would not know where to begin when trying to answer these questions. With these questions in mind, I encountered many articles that would help me locate the potential barriers on good listening. Listening is a key factor in communication. Knowing your listening barriers will help you throughout your career. I'm currently taking a college course in communications, and I have been researching on this topic. Today, I would like to talk about 3 barriers that I think that are very crucial within your career. First, I'll discuss physical barriers. Next, I'll discuss personal barriers. And lastly, I'll discuss gender barriers. Listening is a key factor in communication. Knowing your listening barriers can help you progress throughout your career. Physical barriers are an environmental and natural condition that act as a barrier when you're communicating. Some physical barriers can be noisy office equipment or even a loud conversation from a distance. Visual barriers are also a part of physical barriers. Some visual distractions include someone's personal appearance or could even be something lurking through a window, for instance, a bird. Any number of physical distractions can interfere with the effectiveness of your communication. For instance, working in construction, you always have heavy machinery making noise throughout the day. So whenever you decide to involve yourself within communication amongst your coworkers, you wouldn't be able to get out a complete sentence because the heavy machinery is causing a barrier throughout your conversation. Now that we discussed physical barriers, let's see how personal barriers can affect our listening. Personal barriers occur during physical conditions of the sender and receiver. One trait of physical barriers is our physical well-being. This includes illness, fatigue, and discomfort. Fatigue impacts communication, impairment, activity, and participation. Listening effectiveness is the inability to inadequate hearing information. Personal barriers include psychological distractions. This includes financial problems, and it even could include changes in behavior within your spouses and or children. On one occasion in New Mexico, I would encounter a personal barrier myself. We ended up having to do a 24-hour operation within the squadron, which led me to have encountered a 24-hour fatigueness because I ended up having to work a full day and on top of that, initiate another briefing on top of that. So hopefully I had a Red Bull on my end, and I tried to hope that the Red Bull would save me. It did not. I ended up doing this briefing and exercise while I was tired, which potentially could have affected me in the long run career-wise. While personal barriers play a major role on our listening, now let's talk about how gender can affect our communication. Gender barriers refer to traditional masculine and feminine characteristics and behaviors that are influenced by today's culture and society. If we are not careful, gender differences can create gender barriers while we're listening. Gender barriers to communication can initiate at home and or at your workplace. The movement of some men traditionally into female occupations, such as nursing and office jobs, have increased the likelihood of gender-related barriers. For instance, working in the construction field, on some occasions, men would have a gender barrier between women because the job itself in construction is primarily worked by men. So when there's a woman that comes onto a construction site, there's kind of a culture shock for the workplace because of that gender barrier. So in conclusion, first I discussed the physical barriers. Secondly, I discussed the personal barriers. And lastly, I discussed the gender barriers. Listening is a key factor in communicating. Knowing your listening barriers can help you throughout your career. In conclusion, listening barriers are necessary because they help us throughout our career. Whether the barrier be physical, personal, or gender related, all barriers can tamper a message. Not paying attention during a meeting, training, or even a casual conversation amongst friends can affect the relationship of you personally and socially. This makes listening barriers highly important throughout your day-to-day basis. And that concludes my speech today.